Once my Derbyshire friends realised I wasn't a complete idiot and could actually sail Zephyr IV safely, they expressed a desire to come and see the boat and maybe take a trip out into the Solent. The first to come was Richard, a fellow radio amateur from Derby. He'd never sailed before, but took to it well and was a dab hand at steering, so off we went west from Gosport towards Cowes. It was just after Cowes Week and this amazing ship was still anchored outside. She's called the Golden Horizon and is a cruise ship, the largest square rigger in the world. The square sails roll up into the hollow yards, so it requires a minimum of crew. We carried on west and on to Poole and anchored off Pottery Pier. The following day we pumped up the Avon dinghy and rowed ashore, and we spent the whole day exploring Brownsea Island in glorious weather. If you ever get a chance to visit, then do. It's a very unique patch of England with a fascinating history. It's owned now by the National Trust and probably most famous for being the starting point of the scouting movement. Baden-Powell held his first Boy Scout camp right here.
This is Richard rowing me home, isn't he wonderful? We're just leaving Brownsea Island. Sorry it's a bit wobbly, but we're just heading out towards our boat.
The following day we made our way to Weymouth in glorious sunshine, but with rather a light breeze. As you can see, there are lots of boats here, including the lifeboat, and some nice shops and cafes. It's quite unusual to find a harbour right slap bang in the middle of a town. The plan was to spend the night in Weymouth and set off back the following day. The forecast was a bit iffy, but wind behind us. We did venture out, but came back very quickly. It was horrid. It blew a good gale for the next 2 days, which took us to Friday. The forecast for Saturday offered a brief window before blowing up again. Several other boats decided they would go. Richard needed to be back at work on Monday, so we decided we would join them. So the following morning we set off with just a reefed mainsail. It was brisk to start with, but Zephyr IV took it in her stride, but by lunchtime it was blowing consistently over 30 knots, and the seas round St Albans Head were some of the biggest I've seen. Zephyr IV was quite a handful on the helm, and totally beyond Richard's ability. Several boats around us were broaching in the waves and it was pretty scary. But we only got one big dollop of water on the deck in all that time. Mind you, it was a foot deep. Once we were round Anvil Point, we scuttled down to Poole in the lee of Swanage and the chalk cliffs. It was still pretty windy in Poole. I lowered the mainsail, and as I turned my head at the mast, the wind whipped my spectacles off, which was to say the least a bit disappointing. We anchored for the night and the following morning set off for the Solent. It was windy but not too rough until we got beyond Christchurch. The headland out to Anvil Point gave us quite a bit of lee, I think. It was pretty spicy through Hurst Narrow. And then suddenly we were surrounded by boats beating to windward, the start of the Fastnet Race. On one occasion we had right of way, but the racing boat didn't give way and we jibed rather badly to avoid him, and suddenly we had a very strange shaped mainsail. But the boat didn't slow down, it just kept getting windier, over 40 knots. I found a bit of a lee off Leap Beach and managed to get the remains of the mainsail down by which time the wind was a fairly constant 40 knots and the sea was just covered in white froth. We continued to Gosport with just a scrap of jib, but when the wind got to 45 knots, the Avon dinghy, which was hanging across the transom, took off, and the wind held it against the backstay, so we sort of had a temporary mizzen and went even faster. I realised as we made our way to Portsmouth that just using the jib is the way to go. The boat is towed from the bow and doesn't tend to yaw in the gusts, which it does with the main up. Zephyr IV was so docile that Richard was able to steer with relative ease, which he hadn't been able to do before. As you can imagine, we were very relieved to be back safely in our berth. Lots of boats retired from the Fastnet Race that year because of the conditions that day, some before they even left the Solent. But Zephyr IV was fine, nothing broke apart from the sail, and there wasn't a drop of water in the bilge. She's a good solid boat. The sail wasn't really a problem. I have new sails on order anyway, and the sailmaker made a good repair on the old one, so I was able to sail a few days later. About a week later my next visitors arrived, John and Jenny, along with their friends Brian and Viv. They'd brought some really nice meat pies all the way from Derbyshire, and the plan was to sail across to the Isle of Wight, anchor there for a bit and heat up the pies for lunch. By lunchtime we were just past Wootton Creek, so we anchored there. Then it was time to heat the pasties and the peas on Zephyr IV's rather ancient stove, and we had a very pleasant lunch with a bit of homegrown music thrown in. The trip back was equally pleasant, but by now they even wanted to find out how fast they could sail and wanted to race the hovercraft. All in all, a very successful day. I hope they'll come again.